Ja, välkomna till en dialog. Welcome to a dialogue. So this is, we are here to talk about the views, the perspectives on mental health and mental health care, trying to find out what can be done and what should be done so that we can move forward into a better system, because there are some things that we need to change, we believe. And I'm here with my colleague. My name is Ulf Sandström. I'm here with my colleague, Lasse Mattila.
Yeah, and we are here with Mr. Dainius Puras, a medical doctor and human rights advocate with expertise on mental health and child's health. He's also a professor and the head of the Center for Child Psychiatry and Social Pediatrics at Vilnius University, and the director of Human Rights Monitoring Institute, which is an NGO based in Vilnius, Lithuania. During the past 30 years, he's been involved in processes of transforming public health policies and services with special focus on children's health and rights of children and persons with mental disabilities and other groups in vulnerable situations. He's been also independent expert and consultant for several governments, NGOs, and UN agencies and programs in the field of right to health. He's author of over 60 scientific articles covering issues such as public health, mental health, and public health policies. And last but not least, he's also former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. Mr. Dainius Puras, welcome. It's a great honor to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss important issues, and with pleasure I will share my experience.
Oh, that will be great. Actually, this is the second time we meet, but I think that maybe even we could just present ourselves briefly, even for our listeners, so you and them can get a picture who we are and our background to this conversation. Would you mind starting, Ulf?
Okay, yes. So my name is Ulf Sandström. I'm here because I've been involved in an NGO called the Peaceful Heart Network. During the last 11 years, we have been working to spread tools to alleviate trauma with communities that are vulnerable, and usually communities that don't receive any help. In recent post-conflict natural catastrophes, we started our work in Rwanda, post-genocide survivors there, and then we have worked a lot in DR Congo with liberated child soldiers and women who have been victims of gender-based violence. We have also worked a lot. Today we are active in 30 countries. Our methods are teaching how stress and trauma affects the human system, and why we have methods that allow people to self-regulate this, a kind of emotional first aid with a physical technique that we teach to laymen so that it can translate peer-to-peer in societies that are vulnerable. We've conducted studies on this. One is published and the second one is coming out this year, Worldwide Stress Relief. We've written a book called Trauma Tapping Technique about it, which is on Amazon since 5 years. So we are also in Sweden active with refugees. We've been working with refugees in Lesbos, in the refugee camp there called Moria, which now is no longer, it burnt down. But we are still active there with mental health care. And we have worked with prison populations in Rwanda and other places, and we work a lot with people involved in addiction recovery. So we see a need for a new paradigm and new tools that allow more people to lower stress and trauma. So that's why we are in this situation, looking for expertise like that of Mr. Puras.
Yeah, thanks. And my name is Lasse Mattila. I have Bachelor of Science in Social Work, and I am supervisor in the field of psychosocial work. The last 25 years, I've been working with children and adolescents in vulnerable situations. I have my professional background, well, from the beginning in the world of sports. I've played football professionally in Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Brazil. But as a social worker, I have my background in social services, in the education system here in Sweden. Then I've been back to social services. In the last 7 years, I have worked as CEO and supervisor in the field of foster care in close collaboration with the local communities here in Sweden. I'm also founder and chairman of a national non-profit organization here in Sweden called Association Alternatives to Psychotropics. I'm also publisher of a web magazine called Mad in Sweden, which is a Swedish edition of its American original called Mad in America, which I know that you are familiar with, Dainius. And I'm also community manager for an international network called ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences Connection, which is an organization that works to promote trauma-informed approaches and practices actually in society as a whole. So that's about me. Well, where should we start? Actually, I have a question to start with, if it's okay for you, Ulf.
Absolutely.
Because I have followed your inspiring work, Dainius, the last couple of years, and seen that you, for example, have called for a revolution in mental health care, or a paradigm shift. I was thinking if you just could explain, describe the critics you have on the current biomedical model, which, by the way, is very dominating even here in Sweden within mental health care.
Okay, I can try. First of all, I had a lot of experience from my region, Europe, especially sub-region of Central Eastern Europe, which has a unique legacy of wrong use of resources in mental health. So we still have huge residential institutions where children and adults with all kind of mental health issues are segregated. They live there. And when I became special rapporteur, I had to see the global situation because the mandate is global. So I traveled a lot. I traveled to all continents for official visits, for informal visits. I had a lot of meetings with all possible stakeholders, high-level politicians, policymakers, professionals, psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, and of course users, ex-users of mental health services. And then I came the third year of my rapporteurship. I produced my first report on mental health, then 2 more reports followed. But I have to say that I had to take care of all health, not only mental health. So I was doing quite much also on other health-related issues, but mental health was priority. So my let's say diagnosis of the system was that it is unacceptable. The situation globally is unacceptable because violations of human rights within mental health systems are so prevalent, so widely spread. And the most painful fact is that all these violations are done in the name of medicine and psychiatry, so that everything starts of diagnosing the person, and then with good intentions, human rights are used in selective ways, so that the prevailing idea is that all measures to manage the disorder, to fix disorder, are okay. Voluntary, if voluntary not possible, then involuntary. And with these good intentions, in the end, we have hundreds of thousands of people who are deprived of liberty, for example, or who are being over-medicalized because of this paradigm. So the idea was quite good, to move mental health as much as possible to the paradigm of, to the biomedical paradigm, so that it is seen the same as physical health. And then the idea was that it will be effective and it will be destigmatizing. And it did not happen. This promise never happened, never came into reality. And this is not about accusing or blaming people. It's about discussing once more in the history of mental health care that we should go to one more paradigm, because there have been already several shifts of paradigm, and all of them were, let's say, they were improving the situation more or less. So we should learn from history all these lessons, and we should diagnose the system and see what is not working, and then we should move to changes which are already happening, but quite slowly. So I was happy to contribute to this discourse, which was already happening. I did not say anything new, just independent expert, special rapporteur has to summarize the global view and to provide recommendations how to move. And these recommendations should be oriented to global situation, and then the countries may adapt them to the local situation.
Well, talking about the revolution or paradigm shift, whatever you want to call it, it's if you describe the new paradigm or the more sustainable paradigm, how would you describe it?
Well, first of all, it should be more friendly to human rights of people who use and who need mental health services. It should be in line with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And human rights-based approach should be used not in selective way, but very seriously. The same as it happened with the end of discrimination of women, end of discrimination of people of color, end of discrimination of LGBTI people. Now time has come to end discrimination of people who have psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, because they are discriminated by law and by practice. The laws, as we know in all countries, there is could be good law on mental health, but there is one article in this law which tells that psychiatrists may override human rights of this, are allowed to let's say, for example, deprive person of liberty and move to involuntary placement and treatment. And this means that these people do not have rights. So it's this is the only field of medicine where informed consent principle, which is the main principle in medicine, first do no harm, is not valid. It is allowed not to apply. And this is all about so-called exceptions, but that exceptions are allowed, many people will tell. But the problem is that in many places of the world, and the advanced countries like Nordic countries, let's say Canada, Australia, Western Europe, they should understand how these exceptions are used in many other countries where there may be problems with democracy, for example. So psychiatry may become harmful. Psychiatry may be used for political purposes and so on. So we have to learn from history to have safeguards, but to answer to your question, which kind of paradigm is this? Is more about social model and human rights-based approach taken seriously and not in selective way. And I think that it is not against evidence-based approach. It should go in line. Just for some reasons, what happened during last 30, 40 years, that some experts decided that evidence-based means biological. and it is not really so. We know from recent studies that many interventions that are effective are not biological, they are psychosocial. They do not have such a good funding like biomedical interventions. So there was some misinformation, and in some regions, medical doctors are informed by training, politicians are informed, and the general public is informed that the only real scientific approach in mental health care is biomedical. So this is what is the consensus now, and this leads to problems in overusing this medication, these methods. I'm not against medications. I do not agree with those experts by lived experience who will insist on banning psychotropic medications. I think that they may be helpful, but for sure they are overused now.
You have a very long experience also of, you started this by actually working in mental health care. And when we talked last time, we had a prior dialogue, you mentioned this, that the psychiatric laws in many countries are violating human rights according to the UN Convention. I don't think we are aware of this. I think most of us will be, when I hear that, I'm thinking, yeah, but surely not here in Sweden. But after talking, we started looking into it more and more, and Lasse knows more about this than me because he's spent more time fighting for these rights. But could you give examples of what kind of countries that are actually violating these human rights? Because I understood that you were doing a reporting, was it Canada?
Well, I think that the global situation is that absolute majority of countries have this article in mental health law that professionals, especially psychiatrists, have a right to undermine liberty, to undermine human rights, because as experts, they are given this right and even duty to place the person, to apply involuntary measures, so that for two reasons: so-called dangerousness principle, dangerousness criteria. The person who has mental health condition and could be dangerous for himself and herself or others, or medical necessity principle, which means that psychiatrist decides that if this person does not receive treatment, mainly medications, he or she will, the illness will progress, will be getting worse. So, and this is argument to use involuntary measures. So both arguments are very weak scientifically, because they suggest false idea that, for example, with psychiatry, we could control rates of homicides and suicides. And this gives to psychiatry unbearable responsibility, which when we talk between us, I mean, when we talk with psychiatrists and when we have private discussions, so most psychiatrists and also academic leaders, they agree that psychiatry should not be used for social control. But why then we have such laws when psychiatry should take responsibility? So for psychiatrists, it's better to close the person than not to close, because he will not have a good sleep if the person is not closed. So the psychiatrist will take risk if he will not hospitalize a patient by force, and if he will hospitalize patient by force, everything will be okay. So this leads to psychiatrists telling that, this leads to idea that psychiatry is also hostage of this paradigm. That psychiatry is told to protect people, to protect society from dangerous people. This is how stigma starts. This is how stigmatization of mental health conditions starts. And I, unfortunately, I could not name any country in the world which found some creative solution to abandon this legacy. Of course, it would be not easy to do this, but at least we have to try to use all kind of creative ways to go non-coercive way before we jump to coercion. Now, very easily in many parts of the world, we jump to coercion, because this is what the law and the practice tells. The easiest way to solve complicated cases is to use coercion.
So we have both coercion and we have methods for medication that are used with coercion that maybe are not so efficient or founded in actual science.
Yes, so the paradox is that coercion is used also for medical necessity, means that if the person does not understand how we can help him or her, so we will use involuntary measures, and we will then provide treatment with medications or with electroconvulsive therapy in hospital. The problem is that the promises of biological psychiatry were very, very bright, but now there are quite many clouds gathering on these methods. This is not, again, this is not that they should be abandoned, but they are used in excessive way, and they not necessarily help. Also, because when you provide some treatment by using force, how can you expect that in the end the patient will be, let's say, more healthy, more happy than before force was used? So I was influenced very much by numerous testimonies in many parts of the world, in all regions actually. In one or other word, I had the same complaint from many users of mental health services, who just were asking me to talk to my colleague psychiatrists and to ask them somehow to stop these epidemics of violence, of coercion. So I heard this from people who live with voices, because these people are suffering disproportionately from discrimination, again, in the name of medicine and psychiatry, because this is seen as a very dangerous condition, and psychiatrists are taught to apply emergency measures immediately. But I was listening a lot from women who were telling that they survived psychiatry, and they were telling stories how they were brought by relatives to some place just to talk, and then it appeared that they are locked already, and some people were coming, and she was asking to let her go home, but they told, no, now we will take care of you. And then some procedure was starting, which these women compared with, they felt the same as they felt some years ago when they were raped. So the feeling of physical mechanical restraints for them reminded of very painful episodes of rape. And then, I was talking with my colleagues, psychiatrists in many parts of the world, and providing these examples. And many of them, and this is good prognostic feature, I think, for psychiatry, many of them were taking this seriously. They were telling, yes, this is serious. If patients are thinking this way about us, something is happening wrong. But sadly, many psychiatrists, including influential psychiatrists and academic psychiatrists, means those who teach future doctors, they were telling, why do you listen to psychotic people? Why do you listen to delusional people? If she tells that this was like rape, so this is because she's psychotic. And then I was thinking, well, this shows that psychiatry is really in serious problem. If even those who teach others do not understand human beings and how human beings can feel when they are, suffer from coercion, even if it is with good intentions.
Yeah. But if we see that a change is needed, because we can see it as well, what do you think? It's a hard question, but what can be done from society and even as an individual in a society? Do you have any ideas what can be done to make a change happen?
Well, in my recommendations, one of recommendations in my report was to move towards reduction of imbalances in power imbalances. This is a general principle of democracy, I think. If we move from authoritarian or totalitarian societies to open democratic societies, this means to move from vertical relations between people and groups to horizontal, which are based on trust, on mutual trust and responsibility. Yes. And this has happened in medicine. I mean, when I was a medical student, I was taught paternalistic approach. The doctor knows everything and tells patient what to do, and patient is a passive recipient of care. This changed radically. I don't idealize global medicine, but this changed to partnership. It changed even the laws, but also in practice, except psychiatry. And psychiatry is a hostage of this old-fashioned patriarchal system when one group has to pretend that they know everything. And this is psychiatry. And when I talked with the famous psychiatrists, I was asking, do we really know everything? No, of course, the answer was, no, we don't know, because we know single marker exists. In several hundred diagnostic categories, no single marker. So we don't know. So why we say that we know? This is because this is part of the game. Because the responsibility is delegated to psychiatry, and then psychologists and social workers, they are considered to be not so good experts. And then in the end, the government, especially when it goes to policy reforms, and in the end, of course, the government will ask influential psychiatrists, shall we go for this or shall we not go? So we need democratization. We need process leading to more democracy. And maybe I am naive, but I think that this will be helpful to psychiatry also, not to speak to other groups like users of services, non-medical mental health professionals. But for psychiatrists, it's a too huge burden to pretend, maybe not gods, but some almost gods who know everything, and then you have to pretend. So if we create some decision-making procedures which are more other stakeholders are involved, like other professional groups. This is happening in teamwork, for example. When people work in teams, it's not necessarily that psychiatrist decides everything. Yes, but we should transform this into decision-making process on policy level. So if some countries is discussing mental health reform, to stop telling that you know not so well as psychiatrists because they know better. This is a wrong idea, and the argument that psychiatrists are better experts because they were studying for more years than others is not convincing. So this is not to discredit psychiatrists, but this is to help psychiatrists understand that their expertise is very important, but also expertise of other professionals is very important, and especially expertise of users and ex-users of services. Their lived experience is very important, and then together we can find solutions. Of course, it's a difficult process. Always, democratic process is more complicated than authoritarian process, but it's more effective, and everybody knows this. So this was one of my suggestions. Also, very interesting that in psychiatry is not a homogeneous group. There is a group of psychiatrists in each country who supported my messages of my report, but they are a minority, yes. So unfortunately, by some hardliners in psychiatry, they are labeled as anti-psychiatrists. So, and in my region, which is very heavily medicalized, I mean, this whole post-Soviet region of Eastern Europe, also there is such a bad narrative that if some psychiatrist is telling that we should apply more psychosocial interventions, then biological psychiatrists will tell, oh, you are anti-psychiatrist because psychiatry is about biological psychiatry. So who decided that psychiatry is about biological psychiatry? I don't know. It's very bad decision, because the advantage of psychiatry is that it is most social of all medical fields and should be seen as advantage and not disadvantage. If psychiatrists continue to repeat that we are very biological, psychiatry will disappear in neurology, because neurology, oh, you are biological, so it means it's neurological disorder. If some marker is found in any mental condition, then next day it becomes neurological disorder.
So we did an interview with Jaakko, who is working with Open Dialogue in Finland, where they basically they have a closer communication between all the people involved in a situation, and that way they are getting lower need for medication and better results with, among other things, studies show with psychosis and schizophrenia. So a question that rises is more democracy and less responsibility for psychiatry, but how do we change the view that psychotropic interventions are overused? I mean, not the view that they are the only solution, because they are helpful in many cases. So it's not anti-psychotropic, but there should be alternatives, and maybe they are used more than necessary. I mean, there are studies showing that they are, and that there's a lot of damage done also by the interventions, side effects that are not wished for. How can we change that?
One of the things which I raised in my last report on mental health, which was summer last year, 2020, and it sparked some discussions, was that I raised the issue of list of essential medicines, and then WHO was not quite happy because list of essential medicines is considered to be a holy thing which you cannot touch, because it's so sensitive that there are life-saving medications, and there are, poor countries, developed countries who cannot afford to buy. They can be very expensive, and then it's all this political process, which with TRIPS agreements and all this, how to make essential medicines and vaccines available to develop, especially to global South. And then in this list of essential medicines and vaccines, we find one chapter, one group, which is psychotropic medications. And I raised the idea that this brings misleading message. to policymakers. Because when I was going on official visits to many countries, and I was meeting high-level officials and asking, what about mental health policy and services in your country? So in many countries, immediately the answer was that everything is okay because we have medications that are in the list of essential medicines and they are available. And then the hard talk starts because they tell this is not the main thing in mental health care. No, sir, they tell they save lives. This is a medication that save lives. No, like save from suicide, save from psychosis, and then person will not. And finally, I raised this in my report, and one of ideas was that if they are not life-saving, in fact, medications, and this was a game psychiatry was playing. Let's make them at the level of life-saving medications. But other thing that such message disqualifies other interventions. So then let's create WHO list of essential psychosocial interventions. Why don't we have this list? And if we look at all these algorithms and recommendations also by WHO, they are good. They always tell that in any condition, first choice treatment is not medication. Psychosocial interventions. If depression is mild or even moderate, if ADHD is mild or even moderate, we should start from psychosocial interventions and psychoeducational interventions. But in many countries, this does not count because immediately, because of this power dynamics and influence of big pharma and training of medical doctors, immediately they jump, like in my region, they jump immediately to many people with mild depression are receiving just antidepressants and nothing else because psychosocial interventions are not covered in many countries. So this could be this new discourse without maybe confrontation, or that could be helpful to reduce this asymmetry which happened. Also interesting to see that it all started in so-called West, because in the West there was excessive use of psychoanalysis some 40 years, 50 years ago, and this is why. When this pendulum started to move the other way, for example, in my region, we never had the era of psychotherapy. The Soviet ideology was brutally biological. They applied only biological methods. And then suddenly our peaceful revolutions and finally this Iron Curtain is over. And 30 years ago, we were expecting psychosocial interventions to come, and somehow that this disbalance is managed. Instead, the 90s, Western, high-level consultants, famous psychiatrists were coming and telling the same what Moscow was telling for us for 50 years. So now New York and London was telling that if you have epidemics of suicide, you just reimburse Prozac, and you solve all the problems. And all this psychosocial intervention is good for nothing. They meant all this history of psychoanalysis, which was overused. We never have that. And suddenly we had second massive wave of excessive medicalization, also with instances of corruption, which was coming to these new territories and telling to doctors, to politicians, like Lithuania was always has highest rates of suicide in 90s, and the only way was to biological. So, as if we don't know Durkheim, and as if we don't know suicide is a social, very social. Of course, some cases may be because of severe depression, and then you have to have antidepressant. But if you have epidemics of suicide, during heavy social transition and to manage these epidemics with massively with antidepressants was a huge mistake, which is not recognized still now, which is not recognized, because if somebody tells this, he or she will be labeled as anti-psychiatrist. And again, so we have failure, we have systemic failure, which is not even recognized. And many people will tell, like my opponents who like medications more, they will tell, look, in Sweden or in Iceland, they prescribe even more antidepressants. So we need to catch up with them. But they don't know that in Sweden and Iceland, they prescribe even many more psychosocial interventions. I don't idealize, but I know that there are also quite many psychosocial interventions available. In my region, you cannot get psychosocial interventions, you can get only medications, but the general climate is that the psychiatric lobby will say that we still have to catch up with Nordic countries because they use even more psychotropic medications.
Actually,
so this competition can be quite harmful, I think.
Yeah. Well, actually, to be honest, the Sweden that I see, I still see it. It's the biomedical model is very dominating. And I'm also thinking about the power imbalances that you talked about last time. And I was thinking about the change because even the recommendations from the authorities are very biomedical, from my point of view, at least. And I was thinking about how to make that change happen, to challenge the biomedical model, which many times is harmful as well. If you have some ideas where is it easiest to implement the new perspective to make the change happen? Is it within the system, or is it from outside the system, or a combination? What do you think about that?
I think that there should be several avenues, so to say, because it's too risky to take one way. I have a lot of respect to those groups which insist on legal change, like, Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability, UN Committee. They insist on ban of all non-consensual measures. I recommended more moving this direction, moving like a process, which maybe was already some compromise. So in the end, my position was criticized by classical psychiatric association, but also from human rights activists, at least some, because they did not agree with my suggestion to move with policy approach. And what I was meaning that if countries are not ready to ban all non-consensual measures because they don't know what will happen then. So, okay, so then I recommend to invest much more in so-called alternatives. Just the word is bad. They should not be called alternatives. Yes, they should be called some good practices, non-coercive, like open dialogue and many other alternatives. So this is one way to make them part of mainstream, because what I saw in many parts of the world, that there are these alternatives, they are tolerated, but they do not change the general situation, like free medication wards in Norway. Yes, I visited them in Oslo and in Tromsø. I was very happy to see that these are quite serious cases there, because some people tell, they take just neurotic level and so on. No, they are quite serious cases, and I think that effect is more or less the same as in the rest of the system, which already tells a lot. But my feeling was that these are parallel worlds, like these 50 wards and the rest of the system, which is maybe 4,000 or something like that. And the other way would be to integrate, but then there are other risks. If you integrate open dialogue, if you integrate any good idea into huge existing system, it can disappear, in that system. So anyway, it should be very creative solutions and very creative discussions without hierarchy, again, without this hierarchical tradition, who is better expert, who is not that good, and to have pilot projects and to move ahead. One more interesting discussion global is that some experts tell that global North has advantage in change. Okay, let's go for change. Let's do all kind of innovations. Where it is easier to do this. So some experts will tell easier in global North, because these are rich countries, can afford more. And other experts tell, no, it's easier to do this where psychiatry is weak, where, you know, like in some African countries, they even don't have many psychiatrists or psychiatric facilities. So maybe they have better opportunities for innovations because there will be no resistance. Very painful question, which was raised by many users of services when I met them, that resistance from psychiatry to innovations is still so big that maybe let's try to move ahead without psychiatry. And I understand what they mean, but then having in mind how important and influential in psychiatry, I don't think that politicians will sign this. I mean, so my idea that we still have to work, first of all, not to demonize psychiatry, because I understand this pain of users when they sometimes are even angry and they tell that some psychiatrists are like perpetrators who don't understand that they are. But then there is end of discussion, you know. Then I understand psychiatrists who then tell that dialogue is impossible because the opponents tell that we are perpetrators who need to be brought to justice. So why should we cooperate with them? And then it is this impasse situation, you know, which now is for last 15 years when two sides of experts, or more than two sides of experts, have their own truth, and this agenda is not really moving. I am not happy that the main idea of global movement for mental health is to cover treatment gap. So, and this sounds like good idea, but the price may be heavy again because they tried not to speak about human rights. Just to find everyone who has mental health condition and to fix disorder when you ask with medication, not necessarily, maybe also with psychotherapy, but this is very individually oriented, you know, idea, which I understand lobby of psychiatry, but I would like to speak about inequalities, poverty, violence, and discrimination as main killers, so to say, main risk factors for mental health. And interestingly, both violence and discrimination is fueled by current status quo in psychiatry. So for me, most painful problem is that psychiatry is very much passionate about reducing stigma, but with current paradigm of stigma is feeding stigma, of psychiatry is feeding stigma with this paternalistic approach. So this is the paradox. If we want really to defeat stigma in mental health, we have to change this paradigm. So one of my conclusions.
Actually, I think those words could be the words that round off the conversation, which has been very inspiring and interesting, and I hope we will get opportunities to talk more with each other in the future. Do you have, Ulf, do you have something that you would like to add?
Well, I think you know what the questions we are asking is the views, the perspective of mental health, and you talked about this because you're saying that there are groups of people who are not being treated democratically because they have these diagnoses or that they're regarded as something that is bad for society, which in itself is a stigma. And then we have the democracy issue, and we have the economies of this, because mistreatment is costing a lot, and lack of dialogue is costing. Actually, there's a lot of discussion that we don't have enough budget, we don't have enough money. This isn't the issue. In my perspective, we need some kind of quality control, and the only one I know of that was last done, a huge study, was the Consumer Reports of Mental Interventions in '95, where they actually asked people what helped you at the end of the day. And it was discovered that people with post-traumatic stress, they actually preferred acupuncture and massage. They felt it helped them more. And I think we have a lack of quality control, which might provide, some kind of reference as to what we actually are discussing. So I would love to talk again with you on this, if you're open for that, because it's extremely interesting. And with your background and your knowledge, and the fact that you have actually been working in this from the very beginning, it makes it so different, because it's a fantastic credibility in what you're saying.
Maybe we could speak other time. Just I want to raise one more important issue about childhood. It's about adverse childhood experiences, which is now a very promising, trend in science. And now even with the neuroimaging techniques, maybe they still wanted to discover, markers. But what they discovered that quality of human relationship is the primary. Yes, that it depends on quality of relationship between baby and primary caretaker, where the brain will develop in a healthy way or not in a healthy way, and where the body will respond to stress in a healthy way or unhealthy way. And hence, all epidemics of non-communicable diseases is because of childhood adversities. Because the body learns to react in ill way if there is toxic stress. Yes, so there is some abusive relationship in family, or and this is such a powerful message back again, that if we want to address what others would say epidemics of mental illness, I don't think that's epidemics of mental illness. It's epidemics of poor mental health, because social determinants are not addressed. So again, it's powerful message, and there is also evidence that even for so-called psychotic level, again, psychological, psychosocial risk factors, especially violence, especially sexual violence, can be very, very detrimental. So, and I talk about this because some 20 years ago, it started from American psychiatry. They, at one point, they were telling to resident students that we should not ask people about childhood anymore, because this was what psychoanalysts were doing. But now it's sobering understanding that we should not back to psychoanalysis, but but the childhood, especially adversities in childhood, is of crucial importance to mental ill health. So I want to fix this with medication and electroconvulsive therapy. This is not logical, but so this is back to this pendulum, and I think I agree with some experts that psychiatry has a good future if it applies these suggestions of democratic change. So it's better to lose some power, but gain more reputation and image, and that psychiatry is, I think, should become more social than it wanted to become more and more biological. Then it should rethink, and maybe can also teach the rest of medicine how important are social determinants of health and mental health.
So understanding of the phenomenon is crucial for the interventions, as I understand it. Well, I could talk for hours with you, Dainius, because it's, as I said before, both interesting and inspiring. And as I said, I hope we can get opportunities for that in the future. I see time flies, and I just would like to thank you so much for the conversation. And and the work you're doing, because it's really inspiring, as I said. And I also wish you good luck with that. And
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so
and
much.
It was a pleasure, and let's keep in touch.
Let's
we
keep
keep in touch.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care. Bye.
Bye.